Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar on Bring Your Own Device, BYOD e-examinations. I'm Alan Soong, the facilitator for this webinar, and currently serving as part of the ASCILITE executive and organizing this series of ASCILITE webinars this year. This afternoon, we are very glad to have two presenters to share their experience on BYOD exams. They are Dr. Matthew Hillier, Lecturer in Higher Education E-Learning at University of Queensland, and Dr. Seow-Teck-Keong, Senior Lecturer at the Department of Biological Sciences, National University of Singapore. Dr. Hillier is the co-host of the Transforming Assessment monthly webinar series on e-assessment and is the project leader of two ALT grants, one on e-assessment professional development and the other on e-exams. Dr. Seow has been coordinating and teaching an introductory biology course with enrollments of 650 to 800 students per semester for more than 10 years now. His interest in the utilization of technology and its impact on learning in the context of large classes motivated him to introduce the Bring Your Own Laptop e-exams for the final examination of the course in the previous semester of August 2013. For this afternoon's 1-hour webinar, Dr. Hillier will share first for 20 minutes and followed by a 5-minute Q&A. After that, Dr. Seow will share for 20 minutes and the remaining time will be open for Q&A session. Now, during the question and answer sessions, you could either post your questions in the chat box or click onto the right hand raising button located on the left middle, right below the image box, and I'll give you the right to speak. When speaking, you can click onto the talk button. After speaking, you can release the talk button. So without further ado, could you please help me to welcome Dr. Hillier. Dr. Hillier, please.
Greetings, everyone. I will just only turn on the video for a very short period because I'd like you just to see what I'm looking like. Hello, everybody. How are you going? From sunny Brisbane in Australia. Although the sun's just about to go down here. What I will do is turn off the video now that you've all got to see what I look like, and that way the bandwidth will be a lot smoother. So off goes the video. Okay, so today I'm talking about the e-exam trial that we run at University of Queensland. Now, whilst I'm the project leader of this grant project, I'm not the only one involved. There's Dr. Andrew Fluck from the University of Tasmania, and he developed the predecessor version of the system that we have been further developing at UQ. And of course, my very good, excellent system developer, who I couldn't live without, Marissa Emerson. You can, of course, go to the project website at transformingexams.com. You will find further information there. So there's the link if you want to go to that website. Let me just copy and paste that into the text chat. So if you're curious, you can click the link in the text chat and that will take you to the website. But don't run away just yet. Okay, so what we're doing here is we are targeting on-campus exams, supervised environments, so exam halls or lecture theatres, tute rooms and things like that where you might want to run exams. Ultimately, we want to move to high-stakes exams, in other words, end-of-semester style exams. We're looking, of course, at on-campus exams, and hopefully, although not quite yet, large-scale, although Dr. Seow has certainly done very well on the large-scale end of his talk that he'll give later. What we're not particularly addressing here is the off-campus distance online style exams. That is a sort of a different problem set, as it were, and demands some slightly different solutions. So why e-exams? So from the point of view of University of Queensland, and of course myself for that matter, there's a whole lot of reasons why we might want to go towards e-exams, everything from the pedagogical to the efficiency to the fact that computers are increasingly being used by students these days. So myself and Dr. Fluck from UTAS, we wrote an ASCILITE paper, so that if you want to follow the link to the ASCILITE paper, hopefully Alan will copy and paste the link into the chat. You will find all of the rationale, as it were, as to why we're doing it and the design, if you like, of the design rationale, design features of the system. Essentially what we're looking at is we're faced with this kind of growing disconnect between the way we do high-stakes testing these days, i.e. pen on paper in exam hall, vis-a-vis how students engage with their progressive assessments, how they engage with their everyday experiences, which are increasingly ICT intensive. The exam system that we have developed with mind of the requirements and the drivers and things like that that have been happening. Pertinent features in this particular case, I'm just going to move that control bar over to the side so it's out of the way. Basically we're aiming for a whole computer environment. This contrasts with your typical LMS style environment. So for example, if you wanted to run the exams on your LMS, use the quiz tool, you're essentially restricted to what you can do within a web browser. Whereas students in their progressive assessment have whole computers available to them. So they've got all of the applications, you know, the word processors, the spreadsheets, you know, discipline-specific applications. There might be applications for biology, applications for computer-aided design, etc. So if we're able to bring these kind of features, these kind of capabilities into the exam room, then we're vastly improving the pedagogical scope of what you could do in the exam room context. At the moment what we're doing is we're starting off quite basic. Now whilst the system is capable of a lot more, what we're doing at the moment is we're sticking to the more basic style exams. They are basically word processors. So the students essentially do word processing, word documents as it were, for the response. But it is capable of a lot more than that. We can, as I mentioned, sort of integrate additional applications into the system. The e-exam system that we have built has also got an onboard learning management system as well. And further, this learning management system does not require a live network connection during the exam. So hopefully this is going to afford things like robustness, scalability, because we can have literally thousands of students doing it simultaneously, whilst not having to worry about supplying a robust wireless network. In which, of course, anybody who's managed to do that is in a very small minority. Student-owned equipment as the host or the mechanism for achieving this scalability. Now the alternative, of course, is to get the university to buy all the equipment, but that's hideously expensive. And those of you who just watched the Australian government put down their budget yesterday, it's literally ripping millions of dollars out of the education system in Australia. My institution alone is set to lose something like 60 million out of its budget. So the days of institutions being rich and having plenty of money, I think, are long gone. So if we want to do these innovative projects and bring improvement in the pedagogy in exams, then we need to find efficient and effective ways of doing it. Also, what we're looking at is a modular set of software so that we can provide features that are scalable, so we can do basic things and we can do advanced things, and preferably open source, so that we can build it together, so that we're not reliant on a particular individual person or programmer or company to supply it. Further, because it's open source, we know what's going on, so the institution can have a very deep knowledge of what's going on inside the exam system. They can take ownership of it. Further, the way we've designed it is one version works for all platforms. In fact, we bypass their local hard drive on the student's computer. We don't use their operating system. This also allows us to totally control the software environment because we provide the whole software environment. And this is all achieved through a bootable USB stick. Now, next slide. So for UQ, what we're doing is we're building on previous work. We didn't invent all of this ourselves. The good work at the University of Tasmania provided a good set of inspiration for further development. But at UQ, this is our first time to put the toes in the water, as it were, for doing any exams. So we decided to start slowly. This was a deliberate strategy to minimize risk and to make sure that there's a gentle introduction to e-exams for students. So we restricted ourselves to mid-term in-class style exams with no more than 15% of the course grade. Now the question types that we were able to use, due to the fact that we made the exams computer optional, the students had a choice. Did they want to type or did they want to handwrite? So naturally what we could do on paper was a limiting factor in this particular case. So we had short answers, we had essay questions. We did have multiple choice, but they were really limited in the way we're not taking advantage, as it were, of the computerized marking capabilities of the system. So essentially we had students type X's in the boxes. There's things like we had labeled diagrams and things like that. So you can see on the screen, hopefully you can see on the screen, there's some example questions from the practice exam that we gave students to have so that they could play with the software and get used to it. So for labeling exams, labeling images, we put a table underneath and asked students to fill it in. Now, of course, all this at the moment is manual marking because they're essentially typing into a Word document, and the teacher will get back a Word document that they have to open and mark. Where we want to go, of course, is computerized marking to leverage the onboard LMS that we've built into the system. Now, the current process for actually how it works, at the moment we have the Word document that is prepared by the academic. So they give us the exam. Well, they give me the exam actually, and because this is an in-class exam, the process is much more closed-looped. We're not going through the central exams office at this point, but certainly there's no reason why you couldn't. So the exam paper gets printed by the academic, and that's printed for the students who want to handwrite. I get a copy, and I then duplicate USB sticks that have got the exam paper on them, as well as the exam system. So I've got a duplicating box that looks similar to the one on the screen, plug them all in, press a button, and within a couple of minutes it's copied, 20 or 30 USB sticks. Then in the exam room, we bring those materials to the exam room. Students settle down, we give them a USB stick, and they have to start up the computer from the USB stick. So the USB stick itself provides the operating system and all of the applications. They're not using their Windows or their OS X operating system, they're using our operating system. So they type their exam happily away. At the end, we make sure they save it, of course, onto the USB stick. There's a partition on the USB stick where the students are able to save. The operating system and the applications are on a different partition on the USB stick, so they can't go and damage it or change it or what have you. At the end of the exam, we collect back the USB sticks. We do the reverse process, so we suck all the answers off the individual USB sticks, and then I bundle them up and email them in a zip file back to the lecturer. So that's essentially the kind of the process, the workflow, as it were, of running an exam. The internal, I suppose, components of the USB stick, this diagram gives you a bit of an indication of what's inside. There's the part in the middle, which is the bootable USB stick. It contains the operating system and the whatever software that you want to put on there. It contains a copy of the exam script. In other words, it's just a Word document. And that's all within read-only partitions, if you like, or sections of the USB stick. And we have a separate section where the students' answer files or responses are saved. Now the bits in the little orange circles are what we used for this particular first part of the trial. So you can see we're only using a little bit of the power of this system. The students used the open source Writer software, which is equivalent to a Microsoft Word style application. There was a Word document on there containing the questions, and that was renamed and saved into the answers area for the students. So there's Word documents the students handed back. Okay, next part. Now the demonstration system itself, as I mentioned, you can download it from our website, transformingexams.com. We've tried to design it so it's got multiple modes, as it were, in the one package. Now when you download it, it's probably going to come out as a demo system, but there's a configuration file in there that you can change the configuration settings that will turn it into a real exam. So what we did for UQ exams was we just set the mode called paper, which is paper equivalent exam. What that did was put the dialog box on the screen, and it would just ask the students for the username or a student ID and then name, and then they click Start Exam. So actually the process is a little bit more better explained on this next slide. So from the student's point of view, it's relatively simple in terms of they boot the computer, they type in their ID and their name, and then basically the system does the rest for them. So it will take the exam file, it will do a save as, rename it in the background, and open it for the student. So for the student, it's very simple. Type in ID and name, then basically start typing. So the difficult kind of bits that might confuse students are automated in the system. Bill, yes. No, it works on Macs as well. Yes, Wintel laptops, most of them it does work on, and most Macs as well. But Android, unfortunately not. Basically it needs an Intel processor and a USB port to work. Now, you could use it on an AMD processor-based machine, but it would require a different build of the operating system, which is relatively easy to do. It's available. Now, because we're using all fully open source components, the operating system we are using is the Ubuntu Linux operating system, and they, of course, have a version for other kind of processor architectures. But at this point, we've been sticking with the the 80-20 rule, as it were. 80% of the machines are running, 80% of students' laptops, as it were, are running Intel processors. So we've been sticking with that for now. Okay, so after the student has opened the Word document, or the system has opened the Word document, we've got various different techniques. Now, it depends on what the academic wanted to do in terms of their questions. So the very basic form is, put some instructions there, type a question in, and then please answer the question under this line. Or if they wanted to, they could draw a little box and ask the students to type their answer into the box. The system comes with a simple drawing tool, GIMP, if people know what that is, which is kind of like a Photoshop style drawing app. The exams in this particular trial didn't use that feature, but it was there. People did use the fill in the boxes for multiple choice and for labeling diagrams and things. There was a couple of questions in a couple of the exams that did that. But essentially it was all done within essentially a Word document interface. Okay, so that was the technology. Onto the findings. Now, bearing in mind this is very much a toe in the water trial for us, and we did it across 4 different courses. I'm still analyzing the results because we're still processing them through our scanning system. But I've got most of the data now, and I've just started analyzing it in the last couple of days, so bear in mind the fact that it is a bit limited in terms of results. So what I did was pulled out some pertinent items. So the first table at the top there, I felt the exam system was easy to use. Now these are a 5-point scale, so what we've got here is a 4.5 rating. The number of people who typed their exam across the 4 courses was 54. I know that doesn't sound particularly impressive, but for a first time, exploratory thing, I think it was okay. It allowed us to iron out some of the bugs in the system and what have you. I felt the exam system was reliable against technical failures. That performed reasonably well, and reasonably well compared to the comments that people were expressing, and I'll get to those in a minute. I felt the exam system was secure against cheating. It did fairly well out of there too, 4.3 out of 5. I liked the fact that I could use my own computer. Again, people seem to appreciate that, although it didn't necessarily always work quite as well as they expected. I would recommend the exam system to others. I think that's probably a bit of a clincher. Okay, right, sorry Annette. Yes, read the slides is probably a bit better. So again, 4.3 out of 5 for that one. Now, suitability of the exam by cohort. So what I then did is chopped it up by course. So we had some veterinary technology students who did a 90-minute theory exam. That was mostly short answer. Only 11 out of that cohort decided they were going to type. So the cohort size was 89. So that's the number of students that responded to the end of post-session survey, so it's fairly indicative of the class size. We had almost 100% response rates. So about 89 students in the cohort 11 decided that they would take the chance to type. Criminology, there was a 70-minute theory exam, and this was in 2 halves. There was a single long essay response section and a multiple choice section that was done using pen on an OMR sheet. Now, there wasn't any division between them, so the students could move between typing and filling in the OMR sheet. But again, there were 17 students who took up the opportunity to type. There was a bunch of physiotherapy students. This was a bit of an odd one. There was a 15-minute theory section before they went off to do a practical OSCE. So that's structured clinical style exam. And from that point of view, it was strange because we had to process them in groups of 12 in order to get them through to the OSCE. So we spent 1.5 days sitting in the room doing rounds of 12 students until we processed all 113 odd students. The animal biology course was a mixed short answer and multiple choice, and then the multiple choice they had tables and they just typed an X into the appropriate box. Sorry, I'll get to some of your questions a little bit later. We do have a Q&A section towards the end. Okay, so next slide. The next slide is talking, so what we did is we also had some open text questions about asking them what their main concerns were and what they thought the differences between typing and handwriting exams might be. So I've kind of taken one of the cohorts, which was the criminology cohort that had 17 typers and 50 odd people who handwrote. The fear of technical failures definitely came up. We didn't really have many technical failures, surprisingly, given the early stage of this system. We did have, so what happened, we had several, we had a practice round first, and I got students in to attend practice sessions. Most of the students who typed attended those practice sessions and were able to filter out some of those that had particularly incompatible bits of hardware or whatever it happened to be. In the exam itself, we didn't have too many issues around that. Now, the post-exam survey was filled out by people who typed and by people who handwrote. So what I found was, looking briefly through the comments in the last hour or so, was to find that most people who commented regarding the fear of technical failures and things were those people who handwrote. Now, a lot of people expressed this in the survey that I ran during the practice session. But for those people who then moved on to typing, that fear was obviously allayed quite a lot. However, of course, the fear of failure, the fear of the unknown is a natural human response, I guess. And the last thing that students want when they're going to do an exam, of course, is more stress. Now, behavior of software, so for those people who actually did type, the behavior of the software, which of course is not identical to the OS X and it's not identical to Microsoft Windows, so the differences tend to annoy people a little bit. Things like scrolling and the fact that the shortcut keys weren't the same. But I think a lot of these concerns are addressed when people go to do practice. So really they need to practice a lot more. Flow of production. The differences between the dynamics of handwriting and typing certainly came out in their comments as well. So those people who typed pretty much said, oh, I'm used to it, or I think better when I'm handwriting. And those people who typed said, oh, I'm faster and I think better when I'm typing. So people obviously more or less went to the modes that they felt comfortable with. I did record issues, and I asked people to nominate on the survey form if they had any technical issues. So from the 53 people across the 4 courses who typed, there were 9 people who nominated what they refer to as a technical issue. And I had basically circle this item or tick this box with a comment box underneath. So boot up, startup problems, 2 people nominated. In reality, my observations, because I attended all the sessions, was that a good half the students didn't remember the one-time boot key or how to start it up. This was probably because the practice session was a good 6 weeks before some of the exams, and by the time 6 weeks had gone by, they've forgotten how to do it. So I think it's one of these things that familiarity would more or less solve. entering their details, so they're entering their student name and what have you, their ID, all good, no problems there. So the startup, once they got the system booted, it was okay. They found it was pretty easy to use. Using the software.
2 minutes more. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm almost done. I can. The remaining slides are not so important. This part is. Okay. So things like software problems. There was only one crash during the exam trials, and this was on a really old white MacBook. So if you know how old those are, you know what I'm talking about. 2009 era. It's almost antique in computer terms. But in this case, because students could type, we gave them a piece of paper. They continued. We've got some further system development to make that slightly more robust, so persistent logging capabilities just so that we can do diagnosis later. But the system does have a built-in auto-save recovery feature. However, because it happened within the first 2 minutes of the exam, it wasn't really relevant in that case. The other issues were around sensitivity and scrolling, and the fact that the behavior of the software with their hardware was a little bit different than they are accustomed to. USB mice and things would probably overcome a lot of those issues. Okay, I've lost, where are we? Click the next button. Right. Okay, so where to next? I'm going to go really fast because I've only got 2 minutes left. Basically, integrate multimedia is the next step. Again, using Word documents, but integrating more multimedia. This has already been used at University of Tasmania by Dr. Andrew Flack quite successfully. We can also integrate software tools. So because, again, it's a whole computer on a stick, you can install different software applications. And we've also installed a Windows emulator, so portable Windows apps will also run on the platform. It also has a built-in learning management system, as I mentioned before, so we will be able to do a vast range of computer mark question types. In fact, anything you can do in Moodle, you can do in here. Furthermore, you can use high-definition video because the video is stored on the USB stick. It's not transferred via the network. We've also set it up so that you can use it as a secured gateway to your networked LMS. So if you wanted to connect, this system will. The demonstration system, for example, sets up a limited connection that only can connect via any wireless network to the UQ Blackboard server. So if people try to type in a different URL, it just doesn't respond. Onboard LMS questions, if anybody's familiar with Moodle, then that's what they get. They get all of the different kinds of questions that are on Moodle. Here's an advanced example of the system would be capable of doing 3D virtual spaces, so you could have virtual OSCEs or virtual practicals in an exam situation if you wanted to. Now, the e-exam system, we've developed some guides, so there's a demo setup guide, so if you download the ISO file for the system, there's a setup guide of how to do that, how to turn it into a USB stick. There's also guides for students. I created some videos as well, so there's videos for how to start it up on Apple laptop and how to start it up on a Windows laptop. In this case, it's a Dell laptop. So have fun viewing those videos and what have you, but here we go, is the last slide. I hope I'm done on time. Q&A. Please kindly put the e-exam feedback survey in at some point. You might like to save that so that we can have a Q&A session. So if anybody would like to ask questions, now's a great time to do it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hillier. Okay, now it's time for a question and answer before we move on to Dr. Seow. Anyone would like to have to ask a question? I think that there's a question earlier on from, I believe that this is from Tom. Yes. This is in the chat box.
Okay, Bill's just put through a question. Have you experienced any USB stick failures? No, we didn't. The USB sticks themselves are fairly reliable. It does depend on what brand names you buy. We bought some ScanDisk Cruiser Switch, which seemed to be very reliable. Some of the El Cheapo brands sort of conked out after a couple of times, but that you just have to test which ones you might have. Now, in terms of contingency plans, the system saves itself. Of course, if the USB stick died, then you'd be in a somewhat more problem. I don't think even UTAS has experienced any such thing, but as always, there's points of failure in technical systems. You'd have to be conscious of the life of the USB sticks in terms of how many times you would want to risk reusing them. But you should be able to use them, you know, several dozen times without any problem. How much was the issue for, so Martin's asked the question, how much of the issue was access to power for students? For us, not particularly, because we only had quite small numbers. But access to power sockets is definitely a concern. If you want to scale this up, you're going to need to provide access to at least every second student so that they can swap their laptops in and out to keep the batteries topped up.
Okay, there's a question here from Tom Waddington. Will this system support blended courses? This is can this examination be conducted online for the students who are not at the campus? I must admit I find the idea of having a course with a final examination something from the distance past. I don't design courses with exams, and as a student would not enroll in such a course. Yeah, that's the question. Over to you.
Okay, so blended learning and mixed mode online courses are not really within the scope of this particular system, but it's certainly something we want to be looking at in the future. This system was very much designed for the on-campus face-to-face environment. Conducting exams online, of course, opens up a whole lot of other problems, because how do you then supervise the students and make sure that the student who's doing the typing is the student who's supposed to be doing the typing and not some ring-in or what have you. So the integrity around the process still requires quite a bit of investigation, I feel. Hopefully that sort of answered your question in that department. Andreas asked the question, is there any integration to the LMS? Well, partially in the fact that if your institution has Moodle, then you'll be good to go, because this system has an onboard Moodle. And as far as the transfer of content in and out, you'd just do a course backup in Moodle to move the quiz into the system, and then the answers would then be transferred when we do the reverse copy. So essentially for the Moodle system, we do an SQL database dump, and we collect the answers, and then we re-merge the databases again, so all the students' individual files get merged back into one single gradebook. There's still a bit of work on that. If you're not using Moodle, then maybe not. As I mentioned, you could potentially use it as a secure gateway to Blackboard, but at this point we haven't really gone down that track too much either.
Okay, I think we can
print
now.
Screen the exam. Sorry, yeah, I'll just ask this one. No, they can't print screen. Even if they did, it wouldn't do them any good, because they can't save it to their own computer. Okay, Alan, sorry, I'll let you continue.
Oh, thanks very much. Okay, now we shall move on to Dr. Seow's sharing, and I shall pass the time to Dr. Seow. Over to you.
Thanks, Alan. Yes, for my side, what we have done is basically to conduct a BYOD exam, e-exam, to a very large cohort, a cohort of about 700 students. So first of all, this is not the first time that NUS, the National University of Singapore, has conducted any e-exam. E-exams have actually been conducted since 2006, but this is the first time that we are doing it with the large class. Now, unlike Matthew's presentation, mine will be more from a user point of view, not so much of the technical part of it. Right. So let me move on to the next slide. Yeah. So I teach this module or course, which is known called General Biology. It is a non-majors biology course, and it's open to any students without A-level or high school biology. And this is offered every semester, but I only teach this course in semesters 1, right, in August. And I've been teaching this, as Alan mentioned earlier, since 2003. In semesters 1, the enrollment is about 650 to 800 students. And one thing to note is that the final exam has always been open book and with multiple choice questions. The reason being that with a large class, it is definitely much easier to do the marking with multiple choice questions. So how do I keep myself from being bored from teaching the same course over and over again? What I do is that every semester, every time I teach the course, I will introduce some changes and some innovations to the course. And so last year, in semester 1 of August, right, August 2013, I decided to have the final exam as a bring your own laptop e-exam. Right? We had less students compared to previous year, 672 students. Right. So that's the background. Okay, let me move on. Now, why did I choose an e-exam? I've always thought that exams should be a reflection of how we solve problems in the real world. So when you and we have some questions or we have a query, one of the first things that we'll do is to go and Google it, right? And so I wanted the students to be able to actually perform internet searches. However, in the end, I was told that it's not possible without them communicating with one another, considering that these days technology is very integrated. Even using the browser, you can chat with someone else, just like what we are doing here, right? So that was also one of the reasons why this module has always had an open book exam, right? The other reason why I wanted to have an e-exam was to give me the allow me the opportunity to use multimedia, and I've always wanted to use color figures. So this is one of the figures that I used in the final exam last year. And can you imagine this being printed using grayscale? I've tried this before in previous years, and students asked me to help them identify the parts that they could not see or they couldn't figure out, which defeats the whole purpose of having an exam. Of course, I wanted to use videos and animations as well. The other thing was also to allow the students to have reference to the soft copy reference materials, access to the soft copy materials, because my notes and all that are all uploaded to the NUS, National University of Singapore, NUS LMS, right? We call it the Integrated Virtual Learning Environment. And all my lectures are recorded for webcasting purposes. So I wanted the students to be able to refer to the recordings and also to the notes in soft copy format during the exam itself. And of course, the e-exam also allows me to mark the scripts automatically and to also generate statistics, useful statistics. All right, so what did we do? Well, first of all, I had to seek approval from the senior management. Having done that, we had to look for a venue that could accommodate 700 students, preferably with wired internet connection and also power supply for all the laptops. And we had to also think of preparing spare laptops for students who do not own laptops, and also just in case there were laptops with problems during the exam itself. Together with Alan, we had also prepared a study, a student perception study. So we had to draw up surveys and plan for focus group discussions. All right, so we were ready to go, and we were told that it was impossible to find a venue for 700 students that had internet access and also power supply for every laptop. And so we were directed to 4 separate venues, and each venue could take about only 85 students. And if you do your maths, 85 times 4 will come to about 340. So definitely less than the number of students in the class. So that means I had to split the class into 2 batches, and I had to quarantine one of the batches, and I had to look into the logistics of the movements of the 2 different batches. We were not able to secure wired access, and so we had to depend on wireless internet access. However, we were able to find, the 4 venues that were allocated had power supply for every laptop. Okay, so someone here asked, why the need for internet access? Well, we had multimedia, and also when the students entered their answers, the answers was immediately saved and immediately, in a sense, stored in the system. Was the wireless solid? Well, I'll talk about that later. Okay, having to do the exam, to run the exam in 2 batches, meant a change in schedule. And that means I had to get the agreement from the students, while I'll let you know later. Okay, get set, right? So when we got everything more or less ready, we did a trial run or mock exam. This is to allow the students to install the lockdown browser. And this lockdown browser is compatible, or rather, is compatible with our homemade and National University of Singapore LMS, the Learning Management System, right? So to allow the students to test the system, to test the wireless connection, and also for the students to test out whether their laptops are suitable or can be used to run the lockdown browser. This is where we had a lot of problems. Not much problems with those who were using Apple and Mac, but we had a lot of problems with the students who were using Windows, because, as you know, there are many types of Windows computer out there, and we have students from all over the world, and we had computers with different configurations and so on. But I'm thankful that the IT people were able to sort of more or less solve almost all the problems before the exam itself. And what happened was, during the trial run, anything that could go wrong actually went wrong that day. So it was a very good trial run, and it helped us to look at the systems again, look at how things were implemented, so that we could plug as many loopholes as possible. Invigilators had to be trained to help to solve any technical problems, and we were thinking we also had an alternative plan. The main problem with the alternative plan was that we will have to set a whole set of new exam questions, because the e-exam we had multimedia in the e-exam, so the students had to watch a video, so that is of course not possible with a pen and paper exam. So that was to be set on a separate date, the original date in which the exam was first scheduled on. We even prepared a press release in case things go very badly wrong, right? So that is probably a reflection of how things work here in Singapore. Okay, so finally, we went ahead and it was conducted on the 22nd of November. And note that this was supposed to be the reading week, right? And why is it that I had to get approval from the students? Because the university has actually made that there's an agreement between the student union and the university that there would be no academic activities during reading week. Definitely no exams during reading week. And so I had to get all my students to agree to have the exam, or at least to get their consent to have the exam during the reading week. Right? Yeah, did anyone object? Well, I drafted the form in such a way that they said, well, they understood why the exam had to be organized on a separate date. And I got them to just tick. There was no option for no, right? So that was how I overcome it. Otherwise, it would have been impossible with 672 students. All right, so we had to do we had to conduct the exam in 2 batches. So these are the timings. And what's critical is this part here, right? The movement between of batch 1 and batch 2 students. So we have to move one batch to the quarantine area venue and the other batch to the exam venue. And we had to make sure that there was no contact at all between the 2 batches of students. All right. Did the students have the option of choosing a paper format? No. We were rather draconian here. All right. Okay. Yes, so that's the exam in progress. One of the rooms, one of the venues. So that's actually, there are 80, to be exact, 84 students there. Right. So actually it's an open book exam. You can see that the students, many students brought in hard copy materials as well. Right. And of course, there were power plugs or power points or power source for every computer that you can see here. Yes, there's a set distance. Basically, there's an empty seat in between, that's all. Right. Okay, let me move on. Okay, so we did a student's perception study. Oh, sorry, Bill. How was the power distributed? Trailing leads? No, that those venues had power points at every seat. So it was built in, part of the infrastructure itself. Okay, so the exam was held in November, and we did a pre-exam survey about a month before that, mid-October. Very high response rate, 98% responded to it. This was where I inserted the so-called consent when the students understood that the dates of the examination had to be moved to the reading week because of the lack of venues and so on. All right, we did a post-exam survey and the response rate was much lower, 59%. So that was in mid-December. One of the reasons we did it in mid-December was to allow all the students to complete their final exams with for other courses as well. So mid-December also meant that some of them had already gone traveling, and so we couldn't capture some of them. And of course, there are others who just ignored the post-exam survey. We did focus group discussions, so that was conducted in March this year, and we had about 15 students over 4 different sessions. Right? So that was with the help of Alan himself. Right. All right, so these are some preliminary findings. The positives here and the negatives here. All right, really preliminary because we have yet to have time to really go into the detailed analysis of to give you the figures at least, how many said this or how many said that. So many were happy because the timekeeping would be accurate and also the grading. And many students say that clicking was definitely faster than shading, right? And they could refer to the soft copy notes, which was something good. And many of them used this Control F or Command F to search for keywords within the notes. So that helped rather than flipping through bits and pieces of paper and so on. There are others who also mentioned that it was very comfortable because they were able to use their own device, and one student even said that it did not feel like an exam. It was more like a quiz, done within the confines of her own personal space. So this is very interesting here, right? Right. Bandwidth limitations, because we were using wireless, so we had to limit the file sizes of the notes. So some students were not happy with that. And because of bandwidth limitations, the idea of allowing them to review the webcast recording of lectures did not, we couldn't do that in the end. So some students said that we were not able to keep our promise. Exam taking techniques, so some students, many of us have taken exams with using the pen and paper format, and normally what happens is that with a multiple choice question, let's say you are not sure of the answer, you will eliminate maybe A or C, and you know that maybe you have it's either B or E. So then you still can't decide, so you hope to come back again to that question. So with an E-exam, they found that when they came back to the question, they have forgotten what they had eliminated. So it's a matter of getting used to it, right? So this was something that was mentioned. Many students, of course, did not like the idea of having to go for quarantine, and okay, there were technical issues as well, although minor during the exam itself, but yet there were technical issues with some students, a small number. Okay, so some final words from my personal experience was to yes, definitely to plan and prepare early for the E-exam. You have to look at the existing infrastructure to see whether it meets your requirements. All right. Technical support is very, very important. A trial run and mock exam is a must. Okay. There must be clear and early communication to the students. So some students were very concerned with regards to cheating. They were worried that having access to the browser, there would be ways of getting around it, and they could access the internet and so on. So we had to explain that to them, and make sure that they understood that. Why we are doing this also has to be communicated clearly to the students. And one important thing is that to leverage on what the E-exam could afford, and I made sure that my purpose of doing an E-exam was to one of the reasons was to use multimedia, and we should take advantage of that. And this allowed me to set higher order thinking skill questions. We will talk more about this, and we hope to get our paper ready, Alan and myself, to be able to present it as at the ASCILITE conference at the end of this year. Right. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Seow, for the sharing. Now, we have a few questions, a few more minutes left for Q&A. And I think there are a few other questions that's been posed just now. So perhaps you could address some of those questions.
I must have missed some of the questions. Okay, I think there's an iPad version of the lockdown browser. No, not at this moment. Not the one that NUS is currently using. The one that NUS is currently using is from Respondus, if I'm not mistaken. But we are currently looking at other vendors.
Any other questions they would like to ask?
Bill, I'm not quite sure what is QM's perception. Oh, okay. No, we were not using QM perception. We were using, as I mentioned, Respondus, which, in a sense, I think it was customized to be able to run from using the NUS customized NUS homemade LMS.
There's a question on this. Any cheating cases? Any suggestions to manage that? Over.
No cheating cases. We told, because our lecture theaters have got cameras and closed-circuit cameras, and we told them that the whole sitting, the whole proceeding is being taped and recorded. So that was, we were in a sense policing it very strictly. Oh, Bill, every seat had a PowerPoint. So those 4 lecture theaters, come with that.
There's a question here. It says that can we use IP and dedicated wireless routers to restrict access to certain sites rather than install software to lock down browsers? Over to you.
I am not sure. I'm afraid that that is too technical for me.
There's another question here. What if halfway in the examination the computer crashes? Will the student be requested to sit in a make-up exam? Over to you.
No, we had spare laptops available. So the SOP was that the standard operating procedure was that if the invigilator is not unable to solve the problem within 1 minute, the student will be offered the spare laptop. And because the timer will stop the moment there's a problem, so the student gets the allocated time of 2 hours, so no time is lost.
Okay, I think we have maybe time for just one more question before we end the session officially. And anyone would like to continue to stay on just for a while, you're most welcome to do so after we have ended the session. Anyone for the last question?
I see one here from Martin. Was there any significant difference in pass rates between paper and on-screen exam? No, it's about the same.
Okay, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this webinar. On behalf of ASCILITE and everyone attending this webinar, thank you, Dr. Hillier and Dr. Seow, for sharing with us your experience on BYOD exams. And ladies and gentlemen, we hope that you have found this session useful. We will keep you informed about the webinar schedule in the coming weeks and hope to see you at the next ASCILITE webinar. So bye for now, and anyone would like to stay on just for a short while, you're most welcome to do so. Yeah. Thank you very much again.